subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
In this section of the course, we're going to switch our focus from tables to forms. And forms are really a user-friendly way to interact with our database. And as I said, we're going to keep this super basic. We're just going to create a form that's going to help us maintain the information that we have in Tubble region. So currently we have 6 out of the 7 continents listed out here, and we want to create a nice user-friendly form which will allow us to make changes to the regions, add new regions, so on and so forth. So let's close down Tubble region and let's jump up to the Create tab. And notice we have a forms group here where we have lots of different options when it comes to creating forms. So we have a few different ways that we can do this. We're going to start out by using the form wizard, because the form wizard is always a good option to use, particularly if you're new to doing this type of stuff, because it really does walk you through the process of creating a form. Now notice here it says which fields do you want on your form. So we're creating a form to help us maintain the region information. So I want to make sure that I have Tubble region selected. Now if you have the correct table selected in the navigation pane on the left hand side, when you click on Form Wizard, it's automatically going to populate the correct table. If for some reason this is wrong, we can simply click the drop down and choose the correct table. Now Tubble region only has one field, that is the region field, so we don't have too much leeway here. We're going to click on the arrow to move it across to the selected fields area and then click on next. This next section is where we specify the layout of our form. And we have 4 different types of layout: columnar, tabular, datasheet and justified. Now columnar and justified are pretty similar. They display data in columns running across the page. Datasheet layout, we have columns and we have rows, and then tabular, we have our headings running across the top. And you can see in the preview window, you kind of get an idea as to what the layout of this form is going to look like, depending on which one you select. Now we're going to use tabular in this example. Let's click on next. We now get the option to give our form a title. So let's change this because it's not a table, so TBL doesn't really make sense. And I'm going to stick with my naming convention that I use in Access. So if I'm naming a form, I start out with FRM so that I know that it's different from the tables. And I'm going to call this region, and we'll just say tabular. Do I want to open the form to view or enter information, or do I want to modify the form's design? Well, let's just open it first of all and take a look at it. So we're going to select that top option and click on Finish. So now you can see a couple of things have happened. If you take a look over on the left-hand side, you can see that I now have a new category called Forms, and there is my new form underneath. So it's separated from my tables to make things easier and a bit more organized. And the actual form is open in the main window. And this form is currently just showing the values from Tubble region. So we have those different continents in there. Now, one thing to note when you're working in forms that's slightly different to when you're working in tables, if you right-click your mouse on the tab, notice that we have Form View as opposed to Datasheet View. We also have Layout View and Design View for when we want to make design changes, but Form View is really where you go to preview what your form looks like to your users. So you'll probably find that you're constantly switching between Design View, which shows the design of your form, and Form View, which shows the actual form view. Now, before we get into designing our form, just a couple of little admin-y style things that you need to know about on here. Notice that to the left of all of the region names, we can click in this little rectangle, and that's basically going to select the record. So if I wanted to delete a record out of here, for instance, I can simply click on the rectangle, and then I can go up to records and I can do things like delete record, whatever I want to do. So just be aware that this is your record selector running down the side. If you want to edit anything in here, you can simply double click and you can overtype, or you can make changes. Now it's worth noting that if that is linked to another table, then you might get an error if you try and make a change. So for example, if I try and change Australasia to, let's try and change it to Oceania. If I then click away, I'm going to get this message saying the record cannot be deleted or changed because Tubble ticket region includes related records. So if I take a look at Tooble Ticket Region, you can see in here I already have these regions assigned to different ticket IDs, and one of those is Australasia. So it's not going to let me change Australasia to Oceania because I have a linked table. So if I needed to do that, I have to go in and unlink the tables before I make the change. Now, I don't really need to make this change, so I'm just going to hit Escape, which is going to take me back to how it was previously. So just be aware of that if you do try and make some changes. Now, another thing that we can do is we can add new records onto the bottom just here. So when we have this asterisk, I could click down here, and what's the region that we haven't got? Antarctica. Let's add that in. And if I click away, you can see very simple to add records. Now, notice one thing. My records currently are in alphabetical order, so we go A to Z. But the new record that I've added, Antarctica, this should be at the top of the list, but you can see it hasn't automatically jumped up to its correct position. Now that's due to a little setting within our form properties, which we're going to take a look at in the next lesson. So just bear that in mind. We can set this so that when we add new records, it automatically moves them into their correct position alphabetically. That's it for this lesson. In the next one, we're going to take a look at our form properties in more detail. In the previous lesson, we created our first form to help us maintain the list of regions. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look in more detail at some of the form properties. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to switch into Design View. So let's right-click on the tab and we're going to jump into Design View. Now, this is where you come to make design changes to your form. Notice we have some new ribbons running across the top. We have a Form Design ribbon, we have an Arrange ribbon, and we also have a Format ribbon. So all of these can help us really design our forms and customize them so the look and feel is however we want it to be. And we're not going to get too fancy in this particular course, but hopefully it will give you enough skills so that if you want to really go to town on your form design, then you can. Now, the first thing to note about your form when you're working in Design View is that it has 3 sections. We have the form header, we have the details area, and then we have the form footer. So currently my form header is basically the title of my form. So I have FRM Region Tabular at the top. I then have a little region field, so this is the heading, and then in the details section, this is where the region information gets populated in the form. And then finally at the bottom, we have the form footer, which currently we don't have anything in. Now, one thing to note is if I was to click on where it says FRM Region Tabular, notice I get that little orange box around the outside. So that basically lets me know which part of the form I'm currently editing. So the most obvious change to start out with here is simply to rename the form to give it a more meaningful name. So I'm going to call this, let's say, Region List, and click away to set that. So really simple to make small changes like that. Now, what if I want to make some more formatting changes to this heading? Maybe I want to make it bold. Maybe I want to change the font. Maybe I want to make the font size a bit larger. Well, this is where we need to open up the properties for this particular part of the form. So I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked in this region list area, and then on the form design ribbon, notice all the way over in the tools group, we have a property sheet. Notice the keyboard shortcut for this is Alt Enter. So let's click to pull this up. Now I'm going to drag this out and put it a bit closer to the form so everything is a bit easier to see. Now this is where we can see all of the properties for each specific part of our form. We can make changes to individual items on the form, or we can make changes to the overall form itself. Now, one thing to notice with this property sheet is at the top, notice we have a little drop down. Now this allows us to select and work on and change the properties for different parts of our form. So this is kind of similar to the selection pane in PowerPoint. If I select form header, it's going to select the form header at the top. If I select region, it's going to select the region. Region label, you can see it's selecting each individual part of the form as I change this drop down. If I choose form, I'm now changing the properties for the form as a whole, as opposed to individual elements on that form. So that is the difference. And it's really important to make sure that you know exactly where you're clicked and the properties that you're changing things for. Now, another thing that's worth noting is that all of the items that you can see in this drop-down should be fairly easy for you to identify. So I know that this is the form footer, this is the form header, the region field, the region label, so on and so forth. Now notice that one of these in here is simply called label 2. And this is the kind of generic thing that you'll get if Access hasn't been able to give it a meaningful name. And I would recommend that you take a look in here, and if you have any of these generic labels, you go through and you rename them to something more meaningful so it's easier for you to identify. So if I choose label 2, I can see that that's kind of related to this region heading. So where we have name just below, I'm going to change the property to regions heading, like so. So now when I click the drop down, it's a lot easier to see. Now I can see that just above I have region label, and those two words are separated with an underscore. So maybe to keep things consistent, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to separate my two words with an underscore as well, just so everything is nice and consistent in its naming conventions. So definitely go through and change any generic labels so that you can easily select those parts of the form. So with regions headings selected, if I wanted to make any design changes to this, for example, maybe I want to change the font size, I can do that from here. So let's make it 24 and you can see how that looks. Let's change the font weight. Let's make it bold. I could change the font color if I wanted to by clicking on these three dots and choosing something from the palette. So let's change this to a blue color instead. And you can see all of the different properties that we can change in here to really get very granular on the customizations that we're making to our form. So I'm pretty happy with that heading. What else am I going to do? Well, maybe I want to change the size or the color of the different regions, the different continents in the list. So those are going to appear here where we have detail. So if I click on region, it's going to select that area and then I can make changes down here. So once again, let's change the color. Let's make that the same blue color. And let's change the font size. Let's bring it up to, let's say, 14. And that's actually all I'm going to do for that particular part of the form. Now let's just click the drop down and let's switch into form, because we're now looking at the properties for the form in general. And notice right at the top here, it says record source, and the record source is Tubble region. Now the terminology that we use for this is that this form is bound to the table Tubble region. Basically, it's getting its records from this table just here. And this form properties area is also where we can specify how to order the items in the list. Remember, when we added Antarctica, I told you that it goes onto the bottom. It doesn't automatically order itself alphabetically. So we can come into here and we're looking for the little control called order by. There it is just here. So if I click in here, I could say I want to order these by region, and the default is to order them A to Z. So now when I close down the property sheet, because I've finished with my changes, let's switch back to form view and take a look at it. There we go. You can see those changes in effect. We've got our formatting changes, which are looking pretty good. And notice that Antarctica is now in the correct position. If I was to add something else to the bottom of this list, and we've actually run out of continents, just to show you how this works, I'm going to type in Oceania. And if I want this to jump into the correct position, I simply click on the refresh button on the home tab in the records group. So when I click refresh all, it's going to move that into the correct position. And that is based off of that order by field of region. Now I don't want Oceania in here, so I'm going to select the record up to delete, and then yes, I'm going to delete that out. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the difference between viewing our form in single form view versus continuous view. So what's the difference between the two? Well, the way that we're currently viewing this form is in continuous form view. So what exactly does that mean? Well, when we're viewing a form in continuous form view, it means we can see all of the records in one big long list. So I can see Africa, Antarctica, Asia, Australasia, so on and so forth. So let's change our form from continuous view to single form view so that we can see what the difference is. So once again, we're going to right click and we're going to switch into design view. And we're going to pull up the property sheet for this form. So from the form design tab, we're going to go to property sheet. Remember, you can simply press Alt Enter. So we get our property sheet back. Remember, we want to make sure that we have form selected because this is a setting for the overall form and not just a specific field. So let's scroll to the top and notice here it says default view continuous forms. So that is what I mean. We're seeing all of those regions in a big long list. But what I can do is click the drop down and we're going to change to single form view. So now when we close down the property sheet and view our form, so let's right click and go into form view, take a look at the difference. We're now only seeing one record at a time. So it's showing me the Africa record because that's the first one in the regions list. If I want to move to the next record, I need to use my record selectors and navigation at the bottom. So you can see currently I'm showing record 1 of 7. If I choose next record, it moves on to Antarctica, which is record 2 of 7. So I can scroll through my records in this way, but I'm only seeing one at a time as opposed to the entire list. I can use these to jump to the last record in the list, so 7 of 7, which is South America, or jump back to the first record in the list. I can even add new records from here as well. So I could click New Blank Record and add another region in this way. And you might think to yourself, well, why wouldn't I want to have all of my regions listed? Well, remember you're creating a form, and sometimes space is a premium. So if you have a long list, you might not want to have that entire list taking up all that space on the form. You might just want to set it to single form view, and you can scroll through your records that way. And the good thing about this is that when we're working in this view, we can still use things like filters and searches. I can click in the search at the bottom, I can type in AUS, and it automatically jumps to the Australasia record. So your filters and your searches still work no matter if you're viewing in continuous view or single form view. Now, if you do want to filter your list of results, up on the Home tab in the Sort and Filter group, we can turn on the filter. And if you've ever used filters in applications like Excel, then this should look pretty familiar. So it's picking up all of the regions, and I can use my filter options to select or deselect certain things. So maybe I'm only interested in Africa, Asia and Australasia. I can click on OK, and now notice at the bottom it's showing me I only have 3 records, which would be correct because I only selected to filter 3 regions. So there I have Africa, Asia and Australasia. Notice that when I've applied a filter to my list, it now says filtered underneath. And I can click on this to toggle that filter off or back on. So if I click, it's going to remove the filter and all the records are put back. Click again and it's going to filter that list. Also notice in the Sort and Filter group, we do have a toggle filter up here as well, which pretty much does the same thing. It toggles that filter off or on. Now I'm going to toggle this off to put all of my records back. So the main takeaway here is to remember that you're not particularly limited if you're using single form view as opposed to continuous view. Now we saw earlier that when we right click up here, we no longer have datasheet view. So when we're working in forms, datasheet view basically gets disabled. Now some people still like to have datasheet view enabled for doing things like adding records in. So if you are somebody who likes to use datasheet view, you can actually turn that back on when you're working in your forms. So let's jump into design view and we're going to open up our property sheet again. And we want to make sure that we're modifying the properties for the form. And what you'll see here is that it says allow datasheet view, and currently that's set to no. So what we could do is change this to yes. Close this down, and now when we right click we have access to datasheet view again. So if you are somebody who likes working in Datasheet View, just remember that you can toggle that option back on again. In this lesson, we're going to start to explore Layout View in a little bit more detail because it's probably the only view that we haven't really taken a closer look at. And Layout View is very similar to Design View in many ways. We can use Layout View to really customize the overall design, look and feel of our form. And we're going to create another form and we're going to base it off of Tubble Ticket. Now, before we create that form, there's one thing I need to do first of all. So with the form that we created in the last lesson, Form Region Tabular, if we just double click to open to remind ourselves, this is the form where we have just a list of all of the regions. I'm actually going to rename this form so it's a little bit more meaningful. So from the navigation pane, let's right click and go to rename, and I'm going to call this Form Region Maintenance, because this is the form that we're going to be using to maintain our list of regions. So that's a little bit more descriptive. So now that we've done that, let's create another form, and we're going to do it in a slightly different way because we're not going to use the form wizard this time. Now, the form that I want to design is a form based off of Tubble Ticket. So I'm going to make sure that I have Tubble Ticket selected in the Tables section of the navigation pane. We're going to go up to the Create tab, and then in the Forms group, we're actually just going to click on Form and check out what happens. So you can now see all of the fields that I have in Tubble Ticket laid out as if this is a form. If I right click, notice the different views that we have. If we go to Form View, this gives us a nice preview as to what this looks like for the user. And I can press my Tab key and I can tab through different fields within this form. We have our record selector at the bottom, so I can use that to scroll through all of my different tickets. Now let's quickly jump into Layout View because this is what we want to focus on in this particular lesson. Now if we quickly jump up to Form Layout Design and open up the property sheet and take a look at some of the properties for this form, remember, make sure that you select Form from the drop down. Notice that the default view here is single form as opposed to continuous view, which means we can see one record at a time. Also notice that the record source at the top is Tubble Ticket. So this is the table that the form is getting the information from. So everything's looking pretty good in there so far. Now another thing we can do, if we click somewhere within our form, notice that we have this little crosshair in the top left hand corner. Now, if we click on this, it's basically going to highlight the entire table. And that's kind of exactly what this layout is. It's in a tabular format. Now, if we switch back to Form View again, as I showed you, we can simply tab to move between these different fields. If I wanted to make any amendments, I can simply click in here and I can start to make changes. Now, this means that this form is nice and flexible, but this can also be dangerous because it means that anybody can jump into the form and start to make amendments to the data, and you might not want that to happen. So in a moment, I'm going to show you how you can prevent changes to specific fields within your form. Now, before we do that, I'm going to redesign how this form looks because currently we just have the fields one on top of the other. And this isn't really the most space-saving way to design this form. For example, if you take a look at the ID field at the top, we have a really wide field width. For this particular field, it just contains a number. So we don't really need this big wide field. The same for ticket number. So what we can do is reduce these, rearrange the fields so that our form looks a lot neater, and we give ourselves a lot more space on the actual form. So I think the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put ID and ticket number together on the same row. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select the ID caption. Let's hold down Control and select the actual field, and we're going to delete out this ID row simply by pressing the delete key on our keyboard. Now what we're going to do is we're going to insert a blank row above ticket number. So once again, let's just make sure that we select ticket number up to the Arrange tab, and then in the Rows and Columns group, we're going to say Insert Above to give ourselves a new row. Now let's select the main row, and I'm going to split this horizontally. So once again, let's go up to Arrange. In the Merge and Split group, we have a Split Horizontally button. So when we click this, it's going to actually split this row into effectively 2 columns. So what I can do now is I can drag the ID field to the first column and have the ticket number field in the second column, which is effectively going to put that information on the same row. So what we need to do is we need to bring up a list of all of our fields. So let's go back to Form Layout Design, and over in the Tools group, you can see we have Add Existing Fields. So let's open this up. You can see we get our field list, and now I have all of the fields in my form. So I can simply grab ID and drag and drop it to the first column, and it inserts that ID field. I'm going to grab ticket number and I'm going to put it into the second column. And let's close down the field list. Now you can see we need to do a little bit of rejigging here because it's kind of cutting off the bottom. So I can just simply drag these down and give them a little bit more room. So now that we have both of these on the same row, we no longer need ticket number below. So we can select it and delete. So now I've been through and I've assigned meaningful names to all of those generic labels, so everything is a little bit easier to identify. Now, one thing that's worth pointing out here, and I'm just using the ticket number label as an example, is if we take a look at the properties where we have caption, this is what your users are going to see on the form. So quite often you won't want the caption to look exactly how you've named some of these other fields. For example, the name of this field is ticket number underscore label, and there's no space between ticket and number, and we have an underscore in there. The caption for this field is ticket number, all one word, no spaces. Now, if this is going to be presented to your users who are looking at this form, you're probably going to want to make sure that that has a space in the middle, just to make that a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm going to put a space in between ticket and number. That looks a little bit better. Let's just check some of these other fields. So assigned to, yes, I need to put a space in here as well. Opened by needs a space. Open date needs a space. We've got quite a few in here. Resolve by needs a space. And I think that's the last one. Resolve date also needs a space. So make sure that you're checking those captions to make sure that they are user-friendly for the people who are going to be looking at this form. Now, as I mentioned previously, anybody who's looking at this form currently can come into any of these fields and start to make changes. And whilst that is pretty flexible, it can also be quite dangerous. And I mentioned that you can go in and you can lock certain fields to prevent people making changes to them. For example, a field that I might not want people changing in this form is the ID field. This is a number that's automatically generated by Access to identify unique records. So I don't want my colleague down the corridor jumping into this field and just adding in whatever random number she feels like, because that has the potential to break my entire database. So I want to make sure that the ID field at least is protected. So let's select the ID field. We're going to open up the property sheet, make sure we have ID selected at the top here. And if we scroll down our list of properties, you'll find one that says enabled. Now, currently, mine is set to yes, which is why we can currently edit this field. So what I'm going to do here is double click to change that property to no. Now, notice that as soon as I did that, this field now grays out. And if I try and click in it to make any changes, I'm not going to be able to do that. And the final point I want to talk about in this lesson is just what happens when we add a new blank record. So we've already seen we can add a new blank record at the bottom here. If I just click this new blank record, it's going to open this up. Now, if I switch to Form View, notice that the ID hasn't been auto-generated yet. So the ID doesn't get generated until we start to add some information into the ticket. So as soon as I start to type in a ticket number, you can see that it then gives it an automatic ID of 24. And I can then tab and carry on adding my information. Now, if you get part way through entering information for a ticket and you decide that you no longer want this and you effectively want to cancel it, you can simply press the escape key and it's going to get rid of it. Now, the very final thing we're going to do here is we're going to rename this form. So let's close this down. It's going to ask me if I want to save the changes to the design of Form Tibble Ticket. So I'm going to say yes, and now I'm going to give my form a name. So this is going to be FRM ticket maintenance, and click on OK. So now I have my two forms just here, which are set up to maintain the region list and also the ticket information. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at another way that we can design a form, and that is using the form design option. Now, once again, we're going to design a form based off of Tibble ticket. So I'm going to make sure that I select that table in the navigation pane. We're going to jump up to create, and this time in the forms group, we're going to choose form design. Now, this tends to look a little bit intimidating because you just get this blank form canvas. And this is really where we can build our own form and be very granular in exactly how it looks, what fields we add, and where those fields are positioned. So this is really designing a form from scratch. Now, let's open up the property sheet and take a look at this form. Now, notice here, I've got forms selected. The record source is telling me that this currently isn't bound to any table. And what that means is I currently don't really have any fields that I can add to my form because Access doesn't know which fields to use from which table. So we're going to change that straight away. We're going to click the drop down. You can see I get a list of all of my different tables. So let's bind this form to Tibble ticket. So now that we've bound this form, if we go to add existing fields, you can see I now get all of the fields from Tibble ticket. And I can drag and drop these onto my form and place them wherever I need them to be. So I'm going to add, let's go for ticket number. I'm just going to double click to add that. You can drag and drop as well. Let's add priority and also the customer name. And I can now drag and drop these into position. So notice here, when we click on the label or the actual field, we get these grey squares. And if I drag this grey square, it drags the individual item. If I simply click on the orange boundary and drag, it drags both the label and also the field. So just be aware of that difference. The grey square allows you to move just the field or the caption, whereas the orange one will move both of them in one go. So I'm going to place my ticket number. I'm just going to put that somewhere up there. I'm going to grab priority and let's put this over here. I'm going to drag that in a bit. And I think I'm just going to put customer name in the middle so that we have everything all on one line. And trust me on this, you can spend hours fiddling around with these forms to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. I'm not going to be that careful with where I'm placing things due to time, but I am going to show you a couple of little tricks when it comes to lining things up. So if I want to make sure that all of these are perfectly lined up, I can hold down Control and select everything. And then what we can do is we can use our alignment tools to make sure these are exactly lined up. Now I think I've got these pretty good, but let me show you where these alignment tools are. If we jump up to the Arrange tab, and we can close down the field list at this point, we have an align option just here. So I'm going to say I want all of these lined to the top. And as I thought, these are looking pretty good because there hasn't been too much movement there. If you want to make very small granular changes, you can select a field and use your arrow keys just to nudge those along. And remember, it's always worth switching into form view so you can see exactly how that is going to look to your user and then make changes where required. Now that doesn't look too bad. I might decide to make a change to this priority field because currently this field is quite wide. It only needs to accommodate a number from 1 to 4. So let's switch back into design view. And I'm just going to drag this priority field in a little bit to make that a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to reposition these a bit further towards the edge of the form. Let's grab these and move them along as well. And let's do one final check in form view. Yep, that's not looking too bad. As I said, you can spend a lot more time than I am getting these exactly perfect. And what you should also find when you are in Form View, if you use your record selector at the bottom, you can see it scrolls through all of the different records. And this is another thing that I check to make sure that these fields are wide enough for what they have to accommodate. So I can see there it's kind of cutting off a little bit of this surname. So I'm possibly going to need to make this customer name field a little bit wider. So let's jump back into Design View. I'm just going to drag this out to make it a little bit wider and hopefully be able to accommodate everybody's names. So now that's wider, I'm going to move that across a little bit. Let's take a look at Form View. Let's scroll through and I should find, there we go, that looks a lot better. So switching between Form View and Design View is imperative and really informs the little minor design changes that you need to make. Now, currently, this form, we don't have a great deal on it, but it's just called Form 1 by default. So let's give this a name. We need to right click. I'm going to save it and I'm going to call this FRM Ticket Design and click on OK. Now I'm going to add a few more fields to my form. So let's click on Add Existing Field and I think I'm going to add the ID field. Now, I really want this ID field to go at the top here. So I can select everything. Again, I'm going to hold down Control to select all of these fields and I can drag them down in one go. Then I want to grab the ID field and I want to put that up here. I'm going to move that across a little bit and I think this needs to be a little bit narrower. Once again, let's check what it looks like in Form View. Doesn't look too bad, but I would prefer it if these boxes were lined up a little bit better. So let's go back to Design View. I'm going to grab the box and I'm just going to make that aligned with ticket number. And I think I'm going to put ID all the way over here. And once again, if you need to align things up, you can select both, go up to Arrange, and we can say Align to Top. Now let's see what that looks like. It might not look too great. That doesn't look too bad. I think I'm going to leave it like that for the time being. Now, one thing that's worth noting is that you don't have to have a label for every single field. If you don't want the ID label, you could simply select it and delete it out and just have the field at the top there. So let's move that over. Let's take a look at Form View. I could have it like that. Personally, for me, I actually like to have the label. So I'm just going to Control Z to bring that back again. Now, if we jump into Form View, notice that when we go into Form View, the cursor is in the ticket number field. So the focus is grabbed to ticket number. And if I press Tab, it tabs straight over to priority and skips over customer. So that's not particularly great because I want people to be able to press the Tab key and tab through the different fields in logical order. And this is what we refer to as the tab order. And we can change this so that people can tab through the fields in whatever order we specify. So let's right click and jump back into Design View. And notice right at the top here in the Tools group, we have Tab Order. Let's open this up. And this will show you the order that the user will move through the fields when they press Tab. So you can see the focus is going to be grabbed to ticket number. When they press Tab, it's going to jump straight to priority, then it's going to go to customer, and then it's going to go to ID. So currently this tab order is a little bit all over the place. But fortunately, we can reorder these. So I want the focus to be grabbed to the ID field first of all. So let's drag that up to the top. I then want it to go to ticket number when they press Tab, and then to customer. Let's move that up. And finally, priority. Let's click on OK and check to make sure that's working. So if we go back to Form View, notice that the focus is now grabbed to that ID field. And when I press Tab, it moves through those fields logically. Now, once again, I'm going to add some more fields to my form. So let's jump back into Design View. Let's go to our field list. And what else am I going to add in here? Well, I'm going to want most of these. So let's add title, location, assigned to, opened by, open date, resolved by, resolved date, category, and description. So pretty much everything. And I can now go through and I can start moving these around and really putting these where I need them to be. Now, Once again, you can design this however you like. I'm just going to do a bit of a rough design just to get these into place. I'm literally just going to drag these around and align them. So I'm going to do that off camera. Once I've done that, you can join me back here. So I've moved all of my fields into place and I now have some kind of order on my form. If we right click and take a look at form view, this is what it looks like. And of course, it's always worth cycling through the records and checking that everything fits nicely in the fields and making adjustments where necessary. So I can see here that I'm probably going to want to widen out this opened by field. So let's go into design view. And in fact, I'm going to move these along a little bit. And let's make this one a little bit wider so that it fits in those names. Let's check out form view again, and that looks a lot better. So definitely take some time to really customize the look and feel of your form and make sure that everything looks good. Now, once again, check out what we have here. Ticket number, open date, none of these have spaces in. So if we go back to design view and open up our property sheet, this is where we can go through and we can add a space into the caption. So I need one there, I need one there. This is pretty much what we did in the other form, but very important to do so that your form is as user-friendly as possible. And then the final two, resolved by and resolved date. There we go, perfect. Now, something else you might want to do here is you might want to bring in fields from other tables. I currently don't have the status field on my form, and that's because the status field is contained in its own table called Tubble Status. So if we open up Add Existing Fields, I'm currently only showing the fields for Tubble Ticket. But if I click on Show All Tables, I can then see all of the tables that I have in my database. And if I scroll down, I can see I've got Tubble Ticket Status just here. So this is the link table that links the status table to the ticket table. So this is the one I'm going to need to use because it has that connection in there. So I could then grab the status field and drag and drop it onto the form. And now I'm using fields from two separate tables. So I'm just going to drag this into place. Let's put this in the middle just here. And there we go. Let's do one final check of our form and everything is looking pretty good. Now, the final little thing I want to talk about here, if we jump back to design view, is that you can do things like add headers and footers. So up on the form design ribbon, notice we have a header and footer section. I can choose to add date and time. Now, I don't particularly want the time, but I am going to include the date. So I just need to select the format that I want and click on OK. And that's going to put this piece of code up into the header area. Now, if I wanted the date to be down in the footer instead, I would simply need to grab this field, Control X to cut it, go down to the footer, and Control V to paste that in. I can then move it into exactly the position that I want. So maybe I want this to be in the center. I could drag this box all the way along, and then I can open up the property sheet. And I want to make sure that I'm selecting auto date, which is this field, and then I can choose to align that to the center. So currently it's on the right. I'm going to make that center. Let's click on close. And now when we view our form, you can see that we have the date in the center at the bottom. Now, this form that I've created is actually going to be my ticket maintenance form. But remember, we already have a form called ticket maintenance. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename this form and I'm just going to add _old on the end. And then I'm going to rename form ticket design to form ticket maintenance. So we need to close this down. I'm going to say yes to save changes. I can then right click, rename to form ticket maintenance.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
It's time now to complete exercise 7. And in this section, we're going to practice some of the skills we've learnt in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to create a form using the Form Design button. And I'd like you to add all of the fields from the table Tubble Orders and the customer number field from Tubble Customers. Once you have all of those fields on the form, I'd like you to arrange the fields on the form however you choose. But I would like you to add a title that says Order Maintenance. So make sure that you leave a little bit of room at the top of the form for that title. I'd like you to save and name the form FRM Order Maintenance. And I'd like you to make sure that you name all of the fields and labels in the property sheet. And also ensure that the form is displaying in single form view. Once you've done all of that, switch into Form View and just take a look at your form and make any changes as required. So see how you get on with that. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was to create a new form using Form Design. So let's click the Form Design button, which gives us a blank form, and we're going to add fields from both of our tables. So from the Form Design ribbon, let's go to Add Existing Fields and Show All Tables. So I'm going to expand Tubble Customers and Tubble Orders. And I want to add all of the fields from Tubble Orders. So I'm simply going to double click to add all of these. And I want to add the customer number field from Tubble Customers. I then asked you just to arrange these fields on the page in whatever format you like. But we are going to add a title at the top, so I'm going to leave a little bit of room for that title. So I'm just going to go away and rearrange these. Join me back here in a couple of seconds and we'll continue. So I've arranged my fields on the page. It's now time to add a title. So on the Form Design ribbon, in the header and footer area, I'm going to click on Title. And that's just going to add that at the top. So we're going to call this Order Maintenance Form. And I'm going to do just a little bit of rejigging. I'm going to select all of these fields and I'm just going to move them up a little bit. There we go. Let's right click and save our form. I'm going to call this FRM Order Maintenance and click on OK. The next thing I asked you to do is make sure that you name all of these fields and labels in the property sheet. So if we click on the ID label and go to Property Sheet, you can see here it just says Label 0. So I'm going to want to go through and add ID label. The caption is ID, that is totally fine. We can go to ID, that looks good. Order ID, that needs to be renamed. So let's call this Order ID Label. And I'm going to go through and do the same for all of these. And I'll do this off camera because I think you get the idea of how this works. Now, another thing I asked you to check was to make sure that the forms, let's make sure we select form, is in single form view. And you can see here that mine is, so that's perfect. The only thing we need to do now is right click and view our form. So this is what my form currently looks like. Let's cycle through some records. And I can see that that is looking pretty good. Now, if I press the Tab key to go through my different fields, I can see it's actually skipping over the customer number field. And we're going to deal with that in the next exercise. For the time being, that's all I needed you to do. I will see you in the next section.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.